We're talking about sexual harassment claims and males, and how when the victim is a male, how research shows that reporting is less and those claims are taken less seriously. Here to discuss it is Laura Palumbo with the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. Laura, sorry for the technical issues. Glad that we've got you on the line now.
I'm glad to be here.
So research shows that men are significantly less likely to report workplace sexual harassment. Why?
Well, what we know is that all victims of sexual harassment, assault, and abuse experience a lot of stigma and fear when it comes to coming forward and reporting. But for men in particular, they experience some additional stigma, and a lot of that is just based on the socialization of men and some ideas in culture and society that men aren't victims, men should be able to protect themselves. And those kind of stereotypes and myths make it even harder for men to come forward.
So social stereotypes about masculinity are playing a role here.
Yes, and then of course, because there is so much, there is a greater prevalence of women's experiences of sexual harassment, assault, and abuse. That contributes to this idea that it can't happen to men, but we know very much that it can.
Do you also see that authorities also express skepticism or even downplay claims when it is a male victim?
What we see is actually the vast majority of people who experience sexual harassment, assault, and abuse do not make a formal report, do not feel confident coming forward, and that's even more true of men. So this is something where there is a barrier across the board for people who have these experiences, and that is even more pronounced in men. And I think that is men are in addition to the fear and stigma that all survivors face, they are also concerned about their experiences being minimized, being blamed for what happened to them, people suggesting that they wanted it or provoked it in some sort of way. And all of that, again, has to do with stereotypes about masculinity and the way that socialized expectations are about men and sex.
And what about when it's a high-profile individual who comes forward? Does that change the narrative at all?
Mm-hmm. I think when a high-profile individual comes forward, there's always going to be more attention to it, and sometimes that can mean that there is sometimes with high-profile individuals, people in the public will kind of lose sight of their humanity, and they might respond in a way that is dismissive or mocking. And what's really harmful about that, not just for the specific individual who's come forward, but when those types of really dismissive and harmful comments are made on social media or in the comment section of an article online, survivors are seeing that, and so that really kind of contributes to the myths and misinformation that survivors face.
And that's what we've seen with this story regarding the female mayor and the male alleged victim. On social media, the victim is being widely mocked for filing this complaint. And research shows that men who report being harassed are viewed less favorably. What can we do as a society to change that? Also, what can an employer do to make sure that victims, no matter their gender, feel comfortable coming forward?
I think that the more we can just really as a society come to terms with and accept the fact that sexual harassment, assault, and abuse are really prevalent, and they're something that impact women and men and children and young adults and older adults, the more we can talk about the breadth of how sexual abuse, assault, and harassment happen, the more I think that we can combat the misinformation and myths that exist. And it's also really important that, people are always paying attention. So when it comes to someone making a report in the workplace, the way that they are treated and responded to, it does not only affect them, but it really affects the perception of the overall workplace and environment. So when leaders in a workplace are taking sexual harassment very seriously, when they are, being proactive and responsive, that really can affirm that the workplace culture takes sexual harassment assault and abuse seriously. Unfortunately, if leaders in the workplace are modeling that sexual harassment is something that's not a big deal or not to be taken seriously, that can really create the conditions where those behaviors can become rampant.
Do employers have a responsibility to make men feel comfortable coming forward?
And any employer, like employers are responsible for promoting a safe work environment. So we want that environment to be safe for women and men. We want everyone to realize that they are, that the policies that are in place, the protocols that are in place apply to everyone, and that everyone is protected, and that there is, not, I think that what employers, need to make sure that when they're talking about these policies, practices, and behaviors, that is clear, even when it comes to the examples that they might present in their trainings, that this can happen to men, and that men should be treated respectfully when they come forward as well.
Do you believe that less men are getting sexually harassed, or it's just that less men are reporting it?
Mm-hmm. What we see in the research is that consistently there is, it is both. So what we see in the research is both, that men are less likely to be experiencing sexual harassment and assault, and they're also less likely to be reporting it. So, but 43% of men experience some form of sexual harassment or assault that in their lifetime. That is, I think, would shock a lot of people in the general public. And even though, 81% of women are experiencing sexual harassment or assault, it's still a really significant number of men. And many of those men are not coming forward. And what we want to do is we want to create a society where it is safer for all victims and survivors to come forward.
And what's more common, a man being sexually harassed by a woman or a man being sexually harassed by a man?
So only about 30% of those instances of sexual harassment and assault were committed by women. For men's experiences of sexual harassment. So the majority of men's experience of sexual harassment would be by other men, but it's not, it is the case that women harass men, and 30% of the time is not insignificant. That's still something that is serious and needs to be accounted for.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes me think of perceived masculinity and how this idea of what masculinity is or should be plays a role. What do you think the role of, societal masculinity plays in this?
One of the things that we notice as advocates that work with survivors is that a lot of men who experience sexual abuse, harassment, and assault, they may not even use the same language as women to describe their experiences. And it might be because those perceptions are just so ingrained in the fact that these are things that happen to women, and that, that men should be, are always interested in sex and should always want sex. So what we see very much is that, like, the cultural messages that men receive really impact not only their perceptions of their own experiences, but also how they understand the experiences of others.
So, like, as a parent, for example, how can I raise my boy and my girl to both be conditioned to feel like they can come forward with these things?
What we want to avoid is statements like, be a man about it, boys don't cry, those types of cultural messages that really suggest that men, should not feel pain, should be strong, or should limit certain emotions. What we want to really embrace is that, all of us have ways that we, represent strength, and all of us have times when we feel, sad or vulnerable. And then also too, when we're talking about the types of harmful behaviors that are out there, making sure that we're not talking about them in a way that is specifically gendered. So all people deserve to be respected in a sexual interaction. All people have the right to express consent. Because right now, a lot of the language that we have for talking about these topics with children and young people is very gendered. And the more that we can move beyond that, the more inclusive our education will be.
Very interesting. Great information there from Laura Palumbo, the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. Laura, thank you so much for making the time this afternoon.